Hello and welcome to another edition of No Nonsense with Pamela Wallen. Well, the G7 gathering in Kananaskis has wrapped up, with many asking, really, what is the purpose of this group when Donald Trump comes and goes at will? And is it really a place where decisions are made, or is it a place about making connections? We'll talk about all of that. Trump has left the meeting early, of course, because we're all waiting to see what is going to be the result of the war in the Middle East. And that could happen literally at any moment. But we're going to go ahead and have our conversation about the G7, about the trade deal that the president has promised is coming sometime in the next 30 days. Discussions, he and Prime Minister Carney talked about that. And then meanwhile, back in Ottawa, the government is pushing through the House of Commons and the Senate. It's building one Canadian economy legislation. Concerns even from their own ranks about the kind of powers it gives the federal government. But also, I guess, if you're going to get anything done in 2 years, you're going to need some muscle to do it. We are inviting Gary Marr to join us today. He's president and CEO of the Canada West Foundation based in Calgary. So he was Kananaskis adjacent, as they say, for the week. Gary is a former cabinet minister in the province of Alberta, and he was also Alberta's representative in Washington and in Hong Kong, and the trade file, amongst other things, is his life. So, Gary, thank you. Welcome. Glad you're with us. What's your assessment? What was accomplished at the G7?
Well, I think the expectations were really tamped down. Let me talk about the G8 as it then was back in 2002. Yeah. This was a different event. I was a minister of the Crown at that time and in Alberta. And, G7s, G8s typically had long, 30, 40-page communiques where all the leaders, signed on and agreed to at the end. We know that, President Trump tore up one of his previous appearances at the G7. So this was very different in some ways and the same in other ways. Back in 2002, it was right after the heels of 9/11. So security was very, very tight. Tight was the security this time around as well. You could see, large, probably armed men walking around the streets of Calgary. There were helicopters that would air bridge the leaders. In previous years, they would land at the airport. They'd be greeted by me and Anne McClellan and the mayor of Calgary, Dave Bronconnier, and then they would get in limousines and they would race off at 180 kilometers an hour in these long convoys. But now they're all air bridged, and so there were helicopters flying over Calgary, and the president doesn't travel light.
No, that was somebody was noting that his helicopter plane entourage is bigger than the Canadian military has on offer.
Well, I saw it go. Air Force, or not Air Force. Well, first of all, Air Force One and Air Force Two are at the airport. There were 12 loads of a C-17 Globemaster that unloaded his material. It included 8 presidential limousines, none of which he used, I don't think. It included Osprey helicopters, Apache gunships, Marine One. And so when the president left to go to Kananaskis, Marine One was was followed by 3 Ospreys and a Chinook helicopter. And so it's very costly to move the president around.
We used to watch this happen in New York all of the time when they arrived for the UN General Assembly. And there would be, at President of the Day, they changed, Bill Clinton on down, there would be 50 or 60 vehicles because they travel with a doctor and they travel with a backup doctor, and they, not over and above security, they bring everything with them wherever they go. It's quite stunning.
Well, I guess it shouldn't be a surprise. I mean, that we are aware of. There have been at least 2 attempts on
on his life,
on the president's
for sure.
life. So, but other leaders were out here. The presence of their security details were not quite as heavy as the president's.
Yeah.
But in terms of going back to your original question about what was accomplished by this, I mean, Canada West Foundation, we worked with the School of Public Policy to put together an event with the ambassadors from the G7. So you'll recall that the G7 finance ministers met in Banff about
Right.
3 weeks ago.
Yep.
After they left, we had invited the ambassadors to stay on the Friday and sort of give us, heads up on what they thought was going to happen at the G7. One of the questions that I asked one of the ambassadors, and I should note, the U.S. ambassador did not attend.
Right.
But one of the ambassadors said that, the value of the G7 is that it's small. It's not the G20. It's not, the European Union heads of state. It's not one of the large regional groups. It's just seven.
Yeah.
And he said the benefit of that is the opportunity for face-to-face discussion in a small setting. But the manner in which this was set up, they really they did less plenary sessions with the seven leaders and more bilaterals.
Yeah. That seems to be the trend. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that was probably good. I mean, the prime minister had, 30 minutes one-on-one with the prime minister, and then his teams and their teams came in and had an additional roughly 40 minutes with the president and his team. And this is what generated the suggestion by President Trump that they were going to get a deal done in the next 30 days. Whether that happens or not remains to be seen. But those kinds of one-on-ones at a G7 ought not be sort of diminished. I think they're important. And what they say at them, we have no idea. And there won't be a communique at the from this G7, just a chairman's report on what he saw. And so Prime Minister Carney will have the opportunity to put his own spin on what he saw and what he heard and what was accomplished.
And we see this all the time, whether it's the death of the Pope or a royal wedding or where world leaders go. It is all about these offside meetings, right, where they gather for 10 minutes in a we watched at the funeral of the Pope, Zelensky sitting down with President Trump, right? Was that the scene?
I think it was, yes.
And then, Macron came along and the president said, no, we're just having a one-on-one here. We've got to talk this through. Like, it's just, that is the important thing. And I guess that's the only question, which instead of the expectation of a G7 and some grand communique, why don't we just say the seven should get together a couple of times a year in a nice place and have a round robin? Right? Everybody meet with everybody and, put some check marks beside things.
Well, and you've been involved with government, Senator. You would know that sometimes those meetings accomplish things, but you can't really talk about
them. You can't talk about it, exactly.
Right. So, I would give the Prime Minister some credit that the idea of sort of diminishing the expectations was a good idea, because you've got a number of countries that are interested in re-engaging in multilateralism, and you've got a president that is more interested in more isolation. So so it's very hard to come to a grand bargain with seven leaders in that sort of circumstance. So tamping down the expectations, having more one-on-ones was good. I think also it shouldn't be understated that one of the things that emerged to me as a theme is that the Prime Minister wants to re-engage in relationships that have been frayed over the last 10 years. The invitation of a number of other non-G7 leaders to come to Kananaskis, I think, was important. It included, Mohammed bin Salman, who didn't come.
For obvious reasons. There's a lot of activity.
There's a lot of activity, plus the inability to book 1,000 hotel rooms in the city of Calgary. The prince doesn't travel light either.
Right.
And but bringing in people like Prime Minister Modi. I mean, there were
Yeah.
protests, albeit fairly muted ones in Calgary over that decision. But I think that the expression of foreign policy should always be about the expression of both interests and values.
Yeah.
And for the last 10 years, it's only been about values. And we don't really think about our interests, particularly economic interests. So
Exactly.
so I think there's a sea change in the prime minister's attitude in this regard. I think that bringing in people like Prime Minister Modi indicates that he really wants to rebuild relationships and reignite economic interests between Canada and
Yeah.
other places that have been
If
lost in the last decade.
if you want a friend, get a dog. This is about our national interests, and we've had 10 years of virtue signaling, and now because we did actually formally reestablish relations with India. There will now be an exchange of diplomatic personnel. So that means that's pretty core to our trade relationships. And if
Yes.
so we have to see these things as a reflection of the prime minister's priorities.
I think also having, Prime Minister or President Scheinbaum from Mexico come
Yeah.
in,
Yeah.
there have been Canadians who have sort of thrown Mexico under the bus and saying, we should engage in a bilateral trade arrangement with the United States and Canada, and Mexico can do what they want. I don't
Mm-hmm.
think that makes sense because of the nature of the integrated
Right.
economies that we have. So I think it was an important reach out by the prime minister to bring the president of Mexico to Kananaskis as well.
And talk about not traveling heavy. She flew on Air Canada. Uh, and arrived not with an entourage, so that was sort of interesting.
Yeah, no, it's quite refreshing to have somebody that knows how to use carry-on luggage, right?
Yes, exactly right. So, all in all, your sense is that this was a valuable resetting of the relationship and the signaling to the world, which we're interested in relationships with Asia and with Europe, and seeing, because we're talking about new defense relationships or renewed defense relationships with Europe. However practical that is, it's kind of expanding the horizons.
Well, I think the answer is yes, and as is the case with many new governments, the language is very hopeful. Now,
Yeah,
we can be hopeful, but will we be optimistic? Well, not until we see what actually gets done.
yeah.
So, and that applies to all kinds of subject matters as it relates to a new federal government.
Let's just bring that in, because in Ottawa now the government is putting through two key pieces of several, but certainly the 13 economies becoming one, the Build Canada bill, giving itself extraordinary powers to decide on projects of national interest. Now, in our part of the world, in the West, that we read that as energy, in a big way, whether it's pipelines or transmission corridors or whatever it may be. So there's this balance, which is everybody wants us to make the process way more efficient. This nonsense that it takes 20 years to get a mine started, or, under Bill 69, 15 years to get a project approved. So everybody wants to see that cleaned up. But in doing so, they're giving themselves the right to override laws, for the Prime Minister and Minister LeBlanc to just say, we think this project should go, and never mind environmental laws or never mind consultations. They say they're going to do it, but they have the ability to override. Is it worth it?
So the answer is that I don't know how they can avoid having legislation that has paramountcy over other legislation if they're not going to change bills like
69 and
69, C-48,
Yeah.
Bill C, I mean, there are a number of examples of legislation where the prime minister said, "I'm not going to change Bill C-69."
This is
Right?
there'll never be another pipeline bill, as it's called, because the approval process is so complicated that nobody wants to put money into a pipeline project if they're not going to be able to get anything out of the ground to actually put it in the pipeline. So,
That's right.
but Bill 69, and then and in addition to the legislation, the tanker bans, but
Right.
also the emissions cap. Like, it seems to me, and that was kind of one of the questions. Take away the restrictive, conflicted legislation, and maybe you don't need these superpowers.
Well, that's true. Although, again, the only way that you could circle the square on what he said versus what he says he wants to do is to have legislation that has paramountcy over these bad pieces of law. I the idea of build baby build
Yep.
really should be reframed as sell baby sell, because ultimately you can't. Our economy, as about 2/3 of it depends on exports. We are a very trade
Yep.
dependent nation, and if you can't move it, you can't sell it. So that doesn't
Right.
mean just oil. It means critical minerals. It means forestry products. It means fisheries. It means uranium. It means potash. There are so many things that we don't have sufficient infrastructure to do. Now, I think that, and you were at the reception at the first minister's meetings in
Right. In
Saskatoon.
Saskatoon.
You'll recall that the four Western provincial premiers and the three territorial premiers agreed to support a port-to-port trade corridor. I
Yep.
think this is exciting. I mean, it
Yep.
would move. It would have a corridor between Prince Rupert and Hudson's Bay, and then you could attach onto it roads that go up to places like, Grays Bay, up, right on the Arctic Ocean. And on that corridor, once you get an establishment of a corridor, then you can do all kinds of things with it. You could put 1,000 kV lines on it. You could put pipes on it. You could put maybe autonomous truck lanes in it. I mean, there's so many things that you could do. Fiber optics that would
Yep.
bring, remote communities into the current century. So,
Yes,
so
I'm in one of those that's not.
yeah. Well, there you go. So
Yeah.
I think that was exciting. That
Yeah.
people have talked about a northern corridor for a long time, but this is the first time that I'm aware of that 7 premiers have been on side, and at the FMM that you and I were both there, and the prime minister had asked all the premiers, bring forward the projects that you want.
Yep.
I'm told that there were 90 projects brought forward, and that the amount of time that was set aside in the agenda was 75 minutes. So it was clear on that day that you weren't going to come to an agreement on any particular project,
Right.
but what came out of it was a process. And so, I think that the process, we have to see if it works. But the idea of a process emerging from that meeting, I think, was an important one.
Okay, so we've still got, and I was putting questions to Minister LeBlanc because we're not going through the regular procedure of legislation coming to the Senate where we study it and maybe amend it and send it back because they want all this stuff done by July 1st. We are doing something called committees of the whole, where ministers come and we question them, which is different than what our regular process is and a little troubling, but that aside. So, Minister LeBlanc was there yesterday. He said he is the guy who's going to make decisions about what's in the national interest. They have kind of these very broad categories. It sort of must be environmentally sound, and Indigenous groups should be in favor, and general principles, but not how you would take 90 projects that were put on the table and take it realistically down to 4 or 5, and then what you do with those that don't get their wish. But Minister LeBlanc obviously didn't want to talk about the question of a veto because the prime minister sort of put that on the record too, that he doesn't want to do anything that one province would resist. So Quebec has said not interested in pipelines. Mr. Eby in British Columbia has said not interested in pipelines. So then the question is, you've got these powers to go forward with these projects, but then kind of an expectation or a promise to some of the provinces that he won't override them. But in fact, he's going to have to.
Yeah, and I think the prime minister, I agree with you, the prime minister will have to in some circumstances, but the leverage that he has is to say I'm here in Vancouver today, so
Yeah.
his leverage over somebody like Premier Eby, who doesn't want pipelines, he says, I've got a different set of priorities. I want, port improvements. I want to expand the port of Vancouver. The prime minister could say, okay, that's fine. I'm only going to support that, though, if you also agree that we need to have a pipeline that goes to the West Coast.
Yeah.
So we'll see how good a poker player the prime minister is, whether or not he's able to negotiate these kinds of deals and say, look, you want A, okay, you can have A, but you got to have B as well,
Yeah.
and that's just taking the good with the bad.
You know what surprises me a bit, and I think everybody wants to be optimistic at this point. I mean, there's been such frustration for the last decade over legislation and just the stalling of our economic potential on so many levels. I think everybody really wants this to work. And, the premier of my province, Scott Moe, the premier of yours, as you said at the first minister's meeting, there seems to be real hope, dare I say, enthusiasm. Do you see the same thing?
So I wouldn't say enthusiasm, or well, enthusiasm, yes. Hope, yes. Optimism, not yet. I
Yeah.
mean, Minister Hodgson came out, on the same day as the first minister's meeting's reception in
Right.
Saskatoon in the morning. Minister Hodgson was meeting with oil and gas representatives in Calgary, and I talked to a number of them, and because they had gone from Calgary to Saskatoon to be at the reception. In talking to them, they said, "Look, we like what we hear, but we're not going to be optimistic until we see what they actually do." So there is that. This previous Monday, earlier this week, just around the time of the G7,
Yeah.
Premier Moe and Premier Smith were in Calgary speaking to a large gathering of the oil and gas industry, and they spoke with some amount of enthusiasm for what Prime Minister Carney's approach has been. Um, I don't know if they heard something that was not public,
Yeah.
but they seemed to be quite enthused by what the prime minister had said. So, you know, I I think that's a good thing that the prime minister actually comes to understand why Alberta, Saskatchewan, British Columbia, Manitoba, and the Arctic are important.
Yeah.
Um, I'd say this: it's hard to love something that you don't know anything about. For a long time, the federal government hasn't known about anything, west of Mississauga,
Yeah.
and there's a reason why the Liberals nearly got zeroed out of Alberta, Saskatchewan, large parts of British Columbia, Manitoba, Ontario. It's because the federal government hasn't had much respect for primary industries like agriculture. They haven't really understood it and how important it is to the Canadian economy. They haven't respected the provincial jurisdictions on natural resources and have meddled in things that they don't know anything about.
Yep.
And so I think when the prime minister looks at why did I nearly get zeroed out of these areas, I think he's taking real and serious um, real and serious look at why that's the case and what he can do to fix it. And the symbolism of having the first ministers meeting in Saskatchewan in nearly half a century
Yeah.
is an important symbolism. And I think he is reaching out. Whether he can accomplish it with the people that he's got in his caucus and in his cabinet We don't know. But I would say this: he doesn't owe them anything. They owe him.
Yeah.
They wouldn't have gotten elected but for Mark Carney.
He brought them back from the dead, no
He brought
question.
them back from the dead. So Mark Carney's got some political capital, and I want
Yeah.
to see him be able to spend some of it in order to get some of this stuff done that's important to the Canadian economy.
It's just so funny. I mean, when everybody was so puzzled that Stephen Guilbeault, who's become the symbol, he's kind of the symbol for everything that is wrong in Ottawa, that inability to understand how key energy is to the whole country, to the country's GDP, to our future. And he still sits in cabinet now out of the out of the environmental field, but still feels obliged to share his thoughts from time to time. But I guess we have to see what the prime minister comes to by the fall or mid next year, whether he thinks that some changes might be in order there as well.
Well, I don't think it may not even wait until fall. I mean,
Yeah.
I would suggest that there's going to be a cabinet shuffle before the fall, and I think probably a significant change in the civil service as well. Now that the prime minister's put in place Mr. Sabia,
Yeah.
Mr. Blanchard, and Mr. Lametti, it's a very different looking PMO. I mean, when Minister Guilbeault was talking about the his comments on incorrect that
Yes.
the TMX wasn't even full. I mean, at least now there's a chief of staff. There wasn't a chief of staff at the time,
Right.
but as you know, a chief of staff is there to herd,
Yeah.
herd the cats, right? And
Yeah.
and to say no, Stefan,
Yeah.
Minister, you can't
Yeah.
say that. This is
Yeah.
not your portfolio.
It's
So
not your file. Cool it.
yeah,
Yeah.
cool it. Yeah.
Yeah. Speaking of that group, and Michael Sabia interestingly gave a speech the day of his appointment, his announcement, saying that we have an ambition deficit in Canada, which a lot of people have been saying, certainly in work that we're doing in the Senate, have been saying to us for the last 5 or 10 years, which is there's so much that this is a two-part question. There's so much reliance on kind of government grants, and then we get a lot of startups, but we don't go to stage 2 or stage 3 or stage 4, and we sell it to somebody else and we lose all the intellectual capital because we don't have that entrepreneurial drive. So that's one message that's there. The other message is that all these key players in the Prime Minister's new entourage, his chief of staff and the clerk of the Privy Council, all come out of Quebec Inc., which Quebec has a very particular view of how it deals with the economy, and there's a lot of government intervention and the role of the case, the pension plans, et cetera, et cetera. Can you take those two issues and give us your thoughts on where you think we're headed?
Well, honestly, I don't know yet, but I would. I mean, I would.
I think that's fair.
I will know at some point, but I may be looking in the rearview mirror as opposed to sort of.
Yeah.
I mean, as Yogi Berra, the baseball player, once said, the problem with predicting the future is it hasn't happened yet.
Yeah, exactly.
But I think that we do have to look at what other countries are doing. It's not that Canada has a shortage of talent. We got plenty of talent.
Yeah.
But we have a shortage of ability to scale up. And I paid careful attention to, people like Dr. Jack Mintz, the economist who talks about the kinds of public policy that you need that would encourage companies to find capital formation within the country, and grow, and not have simply the ambition of being bought out by an American parent company, but actually going forward and sort of growing it and going after the world. It's interesting. I mean, because of the postal strike last year, one of the side benefits is that I got about 2 months of The Economist magazine delivered to me all at once. So I'm trying to go through it as quickly as I can. And there was an article about the Scandinavian countries, the Nordic countries, and it was interesting because this is 0.3% of the world's population with more than 1% of the world's GDP. And if you think about the companies,
Wow.
whether it's Nokia, whether it's
Yep.
Ericsson, whether it's Lego, whether it's Novo Nordisk, I mean, these are world beater companies uh, from fairly small northern countries.
Yep.
And so at Canada West Foundation, we've invited the Nordic ambassadors this fall. I invite you to come, actually. You'd enjoy this,
I
Senator.
will. I'm Swedish, I've got some
Well, there you go.
roots in there.
Well, so, I mean, why is it that these countries,
Yep.
what do they do that we don't do? And also, what do they know about being Arctic nations that we
Right.
don't know and that we should know? So those are the two questions that I posed to them, and they're coming this fall.
Yeah.
And maybe it's because they were Vikings. They weren't they weren't afraid of going out into the world and
Yeah.
exploring terra incognita, and conquering markets in other parts of the world. It's a pretty amazing story, and
Yes, it is.
so that's something that when you
Hmm.
ask about will a Quebec centric PMO have a more interventionist, government driven philosophy on how you build an economy. I don't know what the answer to that is yet.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I'll be watching carefully.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, just a final couple of points. Seeing as we're finding optimism under every rock and tree here, what about these negotiations with the U.S.? The president said within 30 days we'll have some idea. The next minute, it's more tariffs if I don't like what you're doing. If you were the 51st state, this would be easier, like blah, 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 blah. Do you actually think there's real progress there? What's your sense of that?
I think that the prime minister has had the right sort of diplomatic approach to the president of the United
Yeah,
States. He didn't, when he went to the White House, he didn't get Zelensky, right? So,
exactly.
and it's what's notable in what I saw in the interaction in the White House meeting, the first one, was that the prime minister was diplomatic, not only for what he said, but also for what he didn't say. I'm
Yeah,
certain that there were times that he would have liked to have jumped up and corrected the president. He resisted the temptation to correct it. He did the same thing during the G7.
absolutely. Yeah.
And
Because
so,
Trump got it wrong on a couple of details about when Russia left
right,
the G7.
right,
Yeah.
right. So I mean, that didn't escape the prime minister's attention, but he showed patience and forbearance. And I think
Hmm.
that's good for the relationship with the president. Now, the president himself is a pretty mercurial guy and can change his mind depending on what he ate for breakfast yesterday.
Yeah.
And so you're probably aware that in Wall Street, there's their trade on what's called taco,
Yeah.
which is Trump always chickens out.
Yeah.
And you can see the roiling of the markets that happens when he says, I'm going to put a 50% tariff on this, that, or the other thing. Markets go down. The Wall Street traders are trading on that. They're buying when the market's down because they know that
Yeah.
the president will reverse course
In 15 minutes. Yeah.
in 15 minutes, possibly. So they've got a short window in which to execute their trades. So I would say that that it's going in the right direction, but it's impossible to predict what the president will do, what will anger him. Any perceived slight can change his whole attitude uh, towards Canada.
Yeah.
I think that when I look at his track record over the last 30 or 40 years, he has always been a supporter of tariffs.
Yep.
And there are a number of motives for the tariffs. it's about sort of raising revenue. Um, I've looked at the numbers. You'd have to have tariffs at an unsustainable rate uh, to be able to
Deal
replace
with the
income tax.
deficit. Yeah,
Yeah, he uses tariffs as leverage for non-trade related things like
exactly.
pay a bigger bill at NATO and meet your
Yeah.
defense commitments. Um, he wants to get rid of trade deficits. The U.S. trade deficits vis-a-vis all trading partners in the world is about $1.2 trillion. The largest one of which is with China at $300 billion. Um, so here's a good question, and I don't know what the answer is. Maybe a guy like Dr. Mintz could answer it. Is maybe tariffs, some level of tariff is okay because in a sense it would replace um, a, a consumption tax.
Yeah.
So in Canada, we hate consumption taxes like the GST,
Yep.
but if you put a tariff in place instead, it would be an invisible tax, and you could get rid of the GST if you put in a tariff on
And
certain goods to raise revenue. So
and we used to have an invisible tax, and then Mr. Mulrooney said, "No, we're going to make it visible so people know what's." These things come and go, right? The
well, yeah.
flavors of yeah.
I mean, if you look at if you look at the cost of debt servicing in this country, it's I don't know. I'm guessing it's around 50 or $60 billion.
Yeah.
And if you look at the value of the revenue from the GST, it's about 50 or $60 billion. So they should rename the GST the DST. It should be called the debt servicing tax.
Yep.
There's an idea.
Yep, that's a good idea. That's exactly what it is. Two quick points. Prime Minister Carney made a move on our contributions to NATO for defense spending, taking it up just at the same time as NATO is saying 2% isn't good enough. We're going to go to 5%, a combination of spending and contribution. Again, an important signal, but this is a huge, big ticket item. And it's going to be every year, not just a one-time shot. And then the announcements at G7 about 2 billion plus another 2 billion in equipment to Ukraine. These are big ticket expenditures. And we're still waiting for Canada to become an energy superpower. Is this, can we afford it? Let me just put it that way.
In the short term, the answer is no. But in the longer term, I mean, what I heard Minister Anand talk about is she specifically used Ukraine as an example. She said, we can't do what we want to do in Ukraine unless we actually grow the pie of our economy. So,
Yep.
in order for us to do what we want to do in support of Ukraine, in order to be able to carry out the humanitarian efforts that Canada wants to be a part of in the world, we actually need to grow our economy. So,
Yep.
Like Premier Canoe, she didn't say it quite as neatly as Premier Canoe, but he says, the economic horse is what pulls the cart for the programs of social and programs that we need and want. So I think that's good. That's a huge recognition that for too long we were just spending money and redividing an existing pie instead of actually growing a pie and doing better. So in the short term, we can't afford doing this stuff. There will be deficits that accrue to the government for some number of years to come until
taxpayers.
To taxpayers, yeah.
But this seems to be a change in the thinking rather than just the modern monetary theory, which is let's just print money and keep on spending because it doesn't matter. Even for someone to say we need to grow the pie, it's like the energy sector. If there's not oil and gas, there's no healthcare. Let's connect the dots, right? Somebody has to pay for this.
So the good news is, I think among Canadians, there's a greater understanding of this than ever before. I mean,
yeah.
we may be thanking Donald Trump 20 years from now,
Yeah.
For waking up Canadians to the importance of standing on our own 2 feet and, looking at things that, that we should be able to produce on our own.
Yeah.
For example, vaccines or pharmaceuticals
Right.
or, a whole bunch of sort of critical items, perhaps even ammunition. I mean, we don't even make our own ammunition for municipal police forces to buy here in this
Yeah.
country. So,
Yeah.
there are a number of things that we could be standing on our own 2 feet doing. So, but I also believe that that with the support of Canadians, there isn't anything that Canada can't do. As imperfect as it is, Canada is an amazing country. I
Yeah.
can't think of another place I'd rather live. Now,
No,
if we
that's
make it better,
exactly right.
the answer is yes. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Gary, great to talk to you. We covered quite a range today, and I know everybody is sitting there, whatever conversation we're having, uncertain and unsure, and probably really fearful about what's going on in the Middle East at this point. Huge consequences there. So we hope that the president has some good negotiating skills on this one.
Well, it's interesting to me because I spoke with somebody in Washington the other day, and they said that the president had told Israel, "Don't do this attack." But now that it looks like it's been pretty successful, he's sort of saying we now.
Yeah.
So,
or maybe that was cover all along. Like, that's the thing, as you say, Mercurial doesn't come close to trying to figure out what's going on in that brain. Gary Marr, President CEO of the Canada West Foundation, former cabinet minister, just a guy who's got his finger on the pulse of what's going on the trade and the economic front. This is why it's always really helpful to speak with you and get your perspective. It's just great. Thank you.
It's always a pleasure. Thank you, Senator.
We'll talk soon. Gary Marr, Canada West Foundation. So thanks to all of you for joining us today, and we'll have another edition of No Nonsense with Pamela Wallin very soon.